You thought this wouldn't come back to Vanguard. Now, let this new card dominate your nightmare.
Stand up! Vanguard!
Hey Cardfighters, welcome back to the second set review for V-BT11 Storm of the Blue Cavalry. Last time we already tackled the cards Rocket Force, so link on top if you haven't seen that video yet. But today we're going to tackle the brand new cards for Nubatama and the brand new playstyle with Shiranui and Shiranui Oboro. And I'm not gonna spoil anything further than that, because we have a lot of interesting things to discuss in this video. So without further ado, let's jump straight into the new cards for this Nubatama set review. And of course, we're going to start off with the reprints and the triggers themselves. And first off, we have the reprints of two generic critical triggers, and both of them are going to have 1 star because they're just generic reprints. Then in that same breath, we have a brand new heal, which is Ferocious Stealth Rogue Kosodo, and this is going to be a 1 star because we already have access to a heal trigger. Now another new trigger that we've got is this draw trigger, which is Alms Giving Stealth Rogue Jirokichi, and this is going to be a 3 star because it's a new draw trigger for the draw trigger lineup. Then on the topic of a new trigger, we also got the new Sentinel critical trigger for Nubatama, which is Stealth Dragon Noroi, and this is of course a 5-star trigger just like all the other Sentinel criticals. Then in the terms of just some basic cards, we have a new starter for the clan, which is Stealth Dragon Madoi, and this is going to be a 1 star because it's just a generic starter just like all the others. And for the new vanilla card for Nubatama, we've got this grade 2 12k vanilla, which is Stealth Rogue of Sincerity Mafusa, which is going to be a sincere 1 star. Now with that out of the way, let's talk about some generic stuff for the clan, and we have here a grade 1, which is Stealth Beast Yami Yamaneko, and Yamaneko has the ability Auto. When discarded from your hand during your turn, Soul Charge 1. Now this ability overall isn't really that amazing. Yes, it can give you some Soul Charge abilities, but it needs to be discarded by your effect during your particular turn, so you cannot combine it with the Perfect Guard. And that means it relies on other cards to actually do something. And its second ability doesn't really make up for its losses here, because its second ability is Continuous Rigor Circle. During the battle it boosted, this unit gets power plus 3k, so it can be a common 11k booster. That with a 12k can make a 23k magic number, but further than that, this card doesn't really help you in general. Overall, I think it's a 2-star card because yes, it can be used in some synergy plays where you can discard your own cards for generating that soul which you might need, but overall, I'm not really a fan of this card itself. Now for another grade 1 that we've got this grade 1 Stealth Rogue of Snake Arts Ujihime, and I don't know since when Nezuko managed to get her way into Vanguard, but her ability is Auto Rigor Circle. When placed, one of your units get power plus 5k until the end of turn. So this can give your units some extra power, and with Nubatama being able to bounce back your board with various abilities, you can potentially use this effect a couple of times in one singular turn, or definitely a couple of times over the course of a single game. But she also has a second ability, which is Auto. When rode upon, you may call this card to the Rigor Circle. So you can write this, and then the following turn for a Soul Blast, get a +1, and that immediately will activate her skill, which can give herself or some other unit, maybe your Vanguard, an additional 5k power, which can increase the overall pressure you have in the early game. Overall, I'm not really super fan of this card because it's still reliant on a lot of other factors to make this card gain a lot of value. So overall, I think it's a 2-star card because I think there are better grade 1s in Nubatama, but it is an interesting card nonetheless. Now, while we're on the 2-star train, let's keep this one rolling because we also have this grade 3 Stealth Rogue of Incantation Hyoe. And Hyoe has the ability Auto Vanguard to Rigor Circle. When it attacks, if you have 2 or more grade 3 cards in your soul, cost counter +1 and discard 2 cards from your hand, and until the end of the battle, this unit gets power plus 15k, critical +1, and your opponent cannot call Sentinels to the Guardian Circle from hand. So yet again, another grade 3 potential finisher for Nubatama, as if the clan needed anything more than that. But overall, I can only give this card 2 stars. You might think the grade 3 in Soul can be annoying, but with the new Shiranui playstyle, that's actually pretty easy to fulfill. But the counterblast and the 2 discards is still heavy for only 15k in a critical, which isn't that amazing. But on top of that, even in the Shiranui deck where you can play this more consistently, you probably still don't want to play this card because you have much better cards you can play and you already are loaded with your grade 3s, and the rest are probably going to be grade 2s and grade 1s to increase the consistency of that playstyle besides this card. Now, to end off the generic support cards, let's talk about the new Grade 3 Searcher, which is Stealth Beast Katari Gitsune. And its unique ability is continuous record circle. During your turn, if you have a token unit, this unit gets power plus 5k. This power upgrade is relatively easy to fulfill in most Nubatama decks, as either you can rely on the E4 decoy tokens for the Hanzo build, or just if you rely on those tokens in your generic playstyle. But this will also work with the new Shiranui deck because they have a new type of token, which is the new Dominate token itself. So overall, it's definitely a 5-star card just like any of the other Grade 3 Searcher because it also has the Grade 3 Searcher skill. Now, the next couple of cards are going to be in the lines of the Bounce Discard effect, and one of those cards is this Grade 1 Stealth Beast Ibudanuki, and Ibudanuki has the ability Auto Record Circle. When the attack is boosted hits a Vanguard, costs Soulless 1. Choose one of your opponent's rear guards and return it to hand. If a card was returned, your opponent chooses a card from his or her hand and discard it. So this is more support for the bounce discard strategy, but I'm not really a fan of this ability because it's on and on hit. Yes, the Soul Blast is good value, but the on hit isn't. So for that, it's going to be a 2-star for me. Then if we go up to a Grade 2, we have Stealth Rogue of Bonds Yura, and her ability is Auto Record Circle. When your Grade 3 Vanguard is placed, cost counter plus 1, and return all of your opponent's rearguards in the same column as this unit to his or her hand. Your opponent chooses cards from his or her hand equal to the number of cards returned and discard them. So this is actually a lot of value because for 1 counterblast you bounce 2 and they discard 2. And that's really good because this is probably the most cost efficient we've seen so far for the rearguard support card for this bounce discard playstyle. But the problem here is that you need to place a Grade 3 as a Vanguard. So these things need to be on the board before you write your Grade 3. And that gives your opponent the option to play around this card. Unless, of course, they already have units onto the board. Now, this problem is completely fixed in the Shiranui deck because Shiranui has the ability to write your Grade 3 normally and then in the main phase, immediately write another Grade 3. So you can call this thing to the column where your opponent has 2 units and then superior write into another Grade 3 to then activate this ability. So with everything in mind, what this card can potentially do and how useful it is for the generic sense, I think it's an okay 3-star card that can help you to do some interesting plays. Now, once again, when we go up a little bit, we go to the Grade 3s and we see then Stealth Beast Zokohihi. And Zokohihi had the ability Auto Vanguard Circle. When it attacks a Vanguard, cost counter plus 1, choose 2 of each of your and your opponent's rearguards and return them to your hand. If 4 cards were returned, your opponent chooses 2 cards from his or her hand and discard them. So where the previous Grade 2 allows us to potentially bounce 2 cards and discard 2 for 1 counterless, this card just does that no matter where those units might be on the board, but it also allows you to bounce 2 of your units so you can reuse those on place effect. That is a lot of value for 1 counterblast. But the problem, and this is a big problem, is that this needs to be your Vanguard. And it also doesn't have the protect marker. So that is not good. So if this is going to be your main Vanguard and you're already sacrificing your protect marker, then there needs to be a solid good reason for it to be your Vanguard. And this ability, which is just a little bit better than the Grade 2 that we just talked about, is nowhere near that. So because of that, this card is arguably just unplayable. So for that, I'm only going to give it 1 star. Maybe it's a budget deck, but even in that sense, it's a very long stretch because it doesn't have the protect marker. Now, besides this generic support for the bounce discard playstyle, we also have a Grade 1, which is basically Magatsu Storm support, as we have Stealth Beast Yagunro, and its abilities are auto when retired from rearguard circle. During your opponent's turn, search your deck for up to 1 Stealth Beast Yagunro, reveal it, and put it into your hand to shuffle your deck. So this card directly synergize with the pseudo perfect guard effect of Magatsu Storm, but at the same time it can be played in any deck because it also synergizes with just generic retire of your opponent's effect, because they can also retire this unit and you can still activate this ability, which is pretty interesting. But on top of that, it also has a secondary effect, which is auto in hand. When your rearguard is placed by your card's ability, cost counter plus 1 and call this card to the rearguard circle. So once you utilize Magatsu Storm's superior call effect mid-battle, where you can call a couple of extra units to the field, you can then combo this Grade 1 off of that skill to also being able to superior call this unit to the field to immediately reload your entire board with a new field, which is pretty interesting because that also sets up for its first ability once you end your turn and go into your opponent's turn. So overall, I think it's a really interesting card that might really help the Magatsu Storm engine. I'm not sure how good the deck is going to be with this support card, but overall I think it's a solid 3-star card that doesn't really harm the deck in any capacity. Now we also got some token support cards, and one of those is this grade 2 Stealth Beast Geki Hasai, and its ability is continuous rearguard circle. This unit gets power plus 5k for each of your token units. So if you have a couple of Evo Decoy tokens, then this can be a pretty decent beater. But that's everything it does. It doesn't really do anything. It also doesn't really help the token strategy. So for that, it's only going to be a 2-star for me. Now the second token support card is this grade 2 Stealth Dragon Gen Kai. And its ability is continuous rearguard circle. During your turn, if you have a token unit, all of your token units and this unit gets power plus 5k. That's really good, because not only will that make this a sizable unit, it's a 14k attacker, but it can also make every decoy token itself also hit for something. And if we combine that with the other grade 2 that can give them all boost and another additional 5k, that turns every token into a 10k booster or attacker, which can actually give you some sizable power onto the field. But more importantly, this card synergizes really nicely with the Dominate token of Shiranui, because that gives that dominated unit an additional 5k power, which probably means that no matter what you're going to dominate, even if you dominate a grade 1, that will hit a 13k base. So this is a really powerful effect in the Shiranui engine together with the Dominate token, and can be a really nice addition for the general Evo Decoy token playstyle. But it also has a secondary effect, which is Auto Rearguard Circle. When placed, choose one of your rearguards and it gets boost until the end of turn. If you choose a unit other than this unit, Soul Charge 1. Not only will this thing turn into a 14k attacker, it could potentially become a 14k booster, but ideally you want to target something else, which then can even give you some soul, which might fuel for other very important effects that will use a lot of soul. So it's a very versatile card that can help you for whatever strategy you might want to play. So with that in mind, I think it's actually a pretty decent solid 4-star card for Nubatama, as it helps you for a lot of different strategies. Now with that explained, let's dive into the main bulk of the new Nubatama cards, which is the new Shiranui playstyle with the Dominate token. And we're gonna kick it off with the new VR, which is Demon Stealth Dragon Shiranui Oboro. Its abilities are continuous Vanguard Circle. During your turn, if you have 2 or more cards in your soul with Shiranui in their card names, this unit gets power plus 15k, and you perform drive checks for the battles your Mask of Domination token attacked. So with no context, this sounds like a really weird skill that isn't really that good, because you need to have 2 more cards with Shiranui in the soul, which means you need to write 3 times, and then it only gets an additional 15k power. But it means that your Mask of Domination token gets drive checks, but we don't even know what those Mask of Domination tokens are. So to at least clarify that point of this skill, let's tackle his second ability, which is Act on Vanguard Circle. Once a turn, cost count plus 1, and discard a card from your hand. Choose a unit card from your opponent's rearguard circle or drop zone and bind it. If you bound the card, call a Mask of Domination token to your back row center rearguard circle, and until the end of turn, that token gets the original grade, power, critical, and abilities of that card bound by this effect, and can attack from the back row center rearguard circle. At the end of that turn, remove that token. So for 1 counterless, 1 discard, you can remove potentially 1 unit of your opponent's rearguard circle, which is the ideal play because that minus them. But if they don't have a good target, you can pick one from the drop zone and basically get that unit on the back row circle behind your Vanguard, and it can attack. And it's the original unit, so you can get whatever kind of skills that is on rearguard circle, so you cannot copy Vanguard circle skills. So if you have a unit that can give any of our units extra power once it attacks, that's a nice addition. But if we have something like, I don't know, a Tidal Assault, which can restand itself, that means we can restand it and attack twice. But the important thing to note with this token itself is that it removes itself at the end of turn. It doesn't retire it. So if that unit has a specific effect that it needs to retire itself at the end of turn to activate something, that will never happen, because this card will just dissipate into nothingness at the end of the turn. It doesn't retire. There's no game check that will see anything happening to that card. Now that we know how this token actually functions, then suddenly that first ability, which can give this card potential drive checks, changes a lot. Because grade 1s and grade 2s will have single drive, and if we have a restander like Tidal Assault, that means every single attack will have a drive check. But if we dominate a grade 3, that's an extra twin drive that we get onto our units, which can be really nuts. And with Genkai that we just discussed that can give any token 5k power, then suddenly we can see the actual value behind that ability, because we can give any dominated grade 1 or grade 2 that extra 5k power, which allows it to hit a 12 or 13k base. And suddenly something like a Tidal Assault that's 14k normally that can swing twice sounds a lot more appealing that would normally otherwise be just 9k. But it still doesn't sound amazing because we need 2 other Shiranui cards in the soul, which is still way too slow. But once we see the other Shiranui card and we see the total package, then we can actually understand how strong Oboro actually is. So let's do that. So the other Shiranui that we got is Stealth Dragon Shiranui. And this grade 3 has the abilities Act on Vanguard Circle, cost, discard a card from your hand, search your deck for up to 1 Stealth Dragon Shiranui Oboro, write it a stand, and shuffle your deck. So this allows us to write twice a turn, because we can write him, get a protect marker, discard a card, and immediately write into the other Oboro. That's actually pretty good, because that allows us to cheat 1 Shiranui into the soul 1 turn faster. So suddenly that continuous ability isn't a turn 5 play, but a turn 4 play, which sounds a lot more doable. But that isn't where this Shiranui stops, because it has a second ability which makes things a lot better. Because its second ability is Auto Vanguard Circle. When it detects a Vanguard, if you have a Vanguard with Shiranui in its card name, this unit gets power plus 10k until the end of turn. Then at the end of the battle, cost, put this unit into your soul, draw a card, choose one of your opponent's rear guards, and return it to his or her hand. If it was returned, your opponent chooses a card from his or her hand and discard it. This ability is insane, because it's effectively a Coral Assault, as it puts itself into the soul at the end of battle and it draws you a card, which is always inherently really strong in whatever clan or archetype you have this. But it also gains an additional 10k power, which means it's a 22k beater. If that was the entire skill, it was already really good. But on top of that, it forces your opponent to bounce a card and then discard a card from hand, which is another minus you generate just for free out of nowhere as on top of this really powerful skill. And incidentally enough, that synergizes with Oboro, because that means your opponent is forced to flood the drop zone with more cards, which means there are more targets for Oboro to dominate if there aren't really good targets otherwise. So that's a really good synergy together. But even then, everything discarded, if this card just put itself into the soul, you already have the 2 Shiranuis into your soul on the first grade 3 turn. Because you can write a Shiranui, which immediately goes into Oboro. Then if you have another Shiranui in your hand, you can call to the Vanguard Circle, attack with it, it goes into the soul, and suddenly you have 2 Shiranuis in your soul, and your Oboro gets an additional 15k power, and the Dominate token suddenly gets the drive checks, and that's on your very first grade 3 turn, which can happen while your opponent is still at grade 2. So, with it all in mind, what this card enables you to do, it's an obvious 5-star card. There's no question asked. This is a really powerful card that enables a potential very powerful engine. Now, with both Shiranuis discussed, let's go to the generic support cards around this Shiranui for the Dominate deck. And the first card that we see is this red one, Stealth Rogue of Cooperation, Sadamune. And its ability is Auto Vanguard Circle. When placed, look at the 7 cards from the top of your deck, reveal up to 1 card with Shiranui's card name from among them, put them in your hand, and shuffle your deck. This is the generic grade 1 card that has the search ability to get out 2 specific cards from the archetype or the deck playstyle. Both Shiranuis are perfect targets to get. Of course, you want to go for the normal Shiranui, but getting the other one wouldn't hurt otherwise. Then, its second ability is Auto Vanguard Circle. When placed, cost Soul Blast 1. Your opponent chooses a card from his or her hand, discard it, and increase this unit's power by the shield of that card until the end of turn. Your opponent draws a card. So for a Soul Blast, you force your opponent to cycle a card. That might sound really bad because it helps your opponent to dig towards their key pieces, but in the context of what Shiranui wants to do, this card will give your opponent a hard choice to make. Because they, of course, want to discard triggers or grade 1s, which means you won't give them good targets for them to dominate. They definitely do not want to discard grade 3s because that will give them access to a twin driving unit. But because of this inherent effect, your opponent, if they want to discard a lower grade unit, that means they're going to give this unit a lot of power, and that in itself will probably also will force more shield value off of their hand if they want to guard your attacks. So this puts your opponent in a really awkward position, which will result in them probably making a wrong move. So with it in mind, what this card allows you to do, I think it's a solid 4-star card for the engine. It gives you that consistency that you need, and it can also help you to just force your opponent to make wrong moves all the way to the end. Now, another support card that we've got is this grade 2 Stealth Dragon Furai, and his abilities are Auto Vanguard Circle. When placed, your opponent chooses a card from his or her hand, discard it, and draws a card. If a grade 0 was discarded, you draw a card. So this is similar to what we just discussed with the grade 1, only in this case, they just don't want to discard a grade 0, and they can still discard a grade 1. But if they discard a grade 0, then it allows you to draw a card. And with the new mechanic with the order card and the new shield ticket, the most ideal target for a lot of players to discard immediately are these shield tickets. But these shield tickets are grade 0, so that can synergize with this card, which can give you also a plus on the back of that. But then it also has a second ability, which is interesting, which is Auto Vanguard the Rearguard Circle. When it attacks, cost counter +1, and return another Rearguard to your hand. And one of your units get power plus 6k until the end of the turn. If this unit is on the Vanguard Circle, draw a card. This is somewhat similar that we've seen with Magatsu Guild, that it allows you to bounce certain cards and it can give you some draws. Ideally, you want to write this thing as a Vanguard so it can give you that inherent draw from this effect. But in certain scenarios, you also don't want to write them as your Vanguard unit because you might not want to activate its on plays effect, because it can sometimes help your opponent digging them to the pieces in their overall general game plan. But in a generic sense, it's a nice card that can help you fuel your consistency engines. It can help you to bounce cards. It can potentially give you power to the board. It can help you draw a card. And at the same time, it can force your opponent to discard cards, which can fuel the drop zone for cards like Oboro to then get better targets over the long course of the game. So with everything in mind, I think it's a 3-star card. It isn't higher because I think the card does have some inherent flaws which can potentially benefit your opponent more than it will benefit you in the long run. Now for the final support card in this set for Shiranui, we have this grade 2 Stealth Beast Gyumato. And Gyumato has the ability Auto Rearguard Circle. When placed, cost counter +1. Your opponent chooses a card from his or her hand and calls it to the Rearguard Circle. Your opponent's auto abilities cannot activate by this call. This is incredibly powerful because this can be used in Shiranui or Boro, but also for the bounce discard playstyle. Because not only will this mean your opponent is forced to call something from the field, so if you want to dominate something, you ideally want to target cards onto the field, as that will make your opponent inherently minus instead of picking something from the drop zone. But if they have an empty field, there is nothing to dominate, so with this effect, you force them to call that unit. But in its same breath, this might be even better for the bounce discard playstyle, because against Shiranui, they can still call non-impactful cards like a grade 1 or maybe a trigger, which you maybe don't even want to dominate. But against the bounce discard playstyle like Kuchikiri Kongo, they don't care. They just bounce it and force your opponent to then discard again. So this can actually be a really annoying card in that playstyle because it forces your opponent to discard way more than they would otherwise. And if they're up against something like a Kokoshi Garus, they might not even want to call anything to the field to basically counterplay that card. But with this grade 2, you effectively say, no. You're going to discard a lot of cards and I will make you do that. So this effect in itself is already really powerful and has a lot of applications within the clan. But it has a secondary effect, which is Auto Rearguard Circle. When it attacks, if your Vanguard is grade 3, this unit gets power plus 5k until the end of turn. So it basically becomes a solid 14k attacker, which is nice, but its main application lies 100% in its first ability, which will make this card on its own already a solid 4-star card. I think this card is a diamond in the rough, which can be utilized for a lot of interesting strategies and can catch a lot of opponents off guard if they aren't aware this card exists. Now, with everything discussed, we can go back to the new VR, which is Demon Stealth Dragon Shiranui Oboro, and with everything in mind, we can actually see what this card can do. And we already knew the power potential of its second ability to dominate any unit and get the potential drive checks and the power and just the pressure of it, because it gives the clan an inherent 4th attack. That in itself is already really good, but with the potential of getting those drive checks makes it even better. But of course, that first ability looked kind of clunky, getting those Shiranui into the soul. But with the supporting Shiranui, we just discovered that's super easy to fulfill. It's very easy to get this skill off, and then get a solid 27k Vanguard swing with also a solid rear guard behind it that can give potentially an extra drive check, or maybe 2 drive checks and whatever extra skill it might possesses. And on top of that, we got support cards like Genkai, which can give the unit an extra 5k power, which means it will hit no matter the circumstances. And then just to top it all off, we have all these amazing grade 1s and grade 2 support cards that either force our opponent to discard cards so we can fill their drop zone with potential targets, or force them to call units to the field so we have targets onto the field to forcefully minus them even more. So that is a really good package for Nubatama, and Shiranui Oboro is an obvious 5-star card. This card is really powerful, and the interesting part about this card is that it can potentially test the Sands of Time itself, because it can become stronger the stronger the opponent's cards get, because it just plays with those cards. So if other clans are going to get better rearguard units like grade 2s, grade 3s, or whatever, Shiranui Oboro will benefit from those upgraded cards as well, as it just take those cards as its own. So yeah, a very interesting deck nonetheless. And with that, we've seen the new cards for Nubatama. A very interesting new support wave for the clan, as it brings back the Dominate playstyle in a new standard jacket. And I think, honestly, this is a very elegant way of implementing the new Dominate playstyle without doing some really annoying shenanigans that happened during the JIRA, where the rulings themselves were quite overhauled and needed some updating, as it didn't really work and planned out that well. But this is a really nice implementation, and the overall support cards around it makes for a really interesting deck. But of course, that's not everything that they got in this set, because Nubatama got some really interesting new generic support cards for the bounce mechanic, as well as the token generating mechanic, and of course we even got a singular card for Magatsu Storm, which might or might not really help the deck at all. But hey, at least they threw the deck a bone, and they shouldn't really complain, as it's a really old archetype within standard itself, and it's really nice that at least Bushiroad gives them a card instead of just giving them nothing. But with that said, that basically rounds up this set review for Nubatama. Let me know in the comments down below what you guys think of these new support cards for the clan, and what you guys think of the new playstyle for Shiranui Oboro. Are you happy with this new take on the Dominate playstyle, or are you just dreading the fact that Dominate is actually back and you actually wished it never came back from the hole it crawled out and it came to standard? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments down below. This video has been brought to you by lovely patrons over at patreon.com/VanguardTheInsider. You guys are amazing. If you do want to support the channel or everything that's happening on the channel, you can go to patreon.com/VanguardTheInsider and become a patron today. But with that said, I'm Mr. Timeleap, and I see you guys in the next one!